A few of you have been messaging me, sending me the link to this article, which apparently went viral in the United States. It says, the US refuses to fall in love with electric cars. Is it true? Or is this just more fake news coming at us from big oil? Well, I'll give you my 2 cents in a minute. Welcome, my friends, to the Electric Viking. Great to have you here. I'm coming to you from Melbourne, Australia. And, you know, I'm on the injury list. This Viking almost killed himself. Seriously. Broke some ribs, smashed up my leg, and hit my head pretty hard on the ground. Fortunately, I had a full face helmet on, and I did smash my face against my helmet. So my lips were bleeding, and yeah, looked like a right idiot trying to do a jump at a BMX track. Trying to show off. You know, that's what happens to the Vikings when they try and do stupid things. But in all seriousness, last night was a pretty horrendous night of sleep for me, and it wasn't fun at all. So hopefully it all gets better soon. I've got a bit of a wacky bruiser, and by the way, I've got a little story for you as well. Here, just there, I was in the hospital, and when I went to leave, the doctor said, "Okay, see ya. You can go now." And the nurse said bye, and I went to walk out, and I realized that the needle for the blood test that they'd done. By the way, they did an ECG, a blood test, and a ultrasound to check that, and some x-rays as well. So 4 different tests on me. Anyway, I went to leave the hospital, and I saw that I still had the needle in from when they did the blood test. So I pulled it out, and it was a massive needle. It was the biggest needle I've ever seen. I've pulled needles out before after having surgery and having blood tests and things, and just, I don't know why, but here in Australia, just, you know, I've had to do it a few times. But anyway, I pulled this one out, and the blood just spurted all the way across the room and went absolutely everywhere. Went on the bed, went on the ground, and I had to pulled my hospital gown off real quick, and I still had that on as well, and put it down onto my arm and tried to stop it from bleeding. But I've never seen blood spurt like that before, ever in my life. It was very weird. What's going on in the US? The Wired says that the US is refusing to fall in love with electric cars. And is this true? As China and Europe lead the race to make electric vehicles mainstream, America is lagging behind. This is a problem. Is it true that they are lagging behind? Yes, absolutely, of course. In terms of percentage of cars that are electric in America that were sold last year, yeah, I mean, obviously the US is light years behind China and light years behind Europe as well. Will that change? The Wired says, or Wired.com says, in December of 2021, sales of electric vehicles overtook sales of diesel cars for the first time in Europe, as 176,000 EVs rolled out of car dealerships across the continent. At the same time in China, the country's automotive industry announced that EV sales for the year had ballooned by 158% compared with 2020, as more than 3.5 million vehicles took to the roads. These sales figures were not a blip. That's true. In Europe, EVs made up an estimated 14% of all new vehicles sold in 2021, according to the banking and financial services company ING. In China, it was 10%. However, in China, those figures are a bit misleading because by the end of the year, it was 20%. In the United States, not so much. EVs made up just 4% of vehicle sales last year. While the world falls in love with electric cars, the US is holding out. If it's not careful, the knock-on impact on the rest of the world could be huge. Transportation is the biggest single contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, and the country in turn is the second largest contributor to global carbon emissions. Global carbon emissions are an issue, obviously. Since EVs are emerging battery technologies, they face several significant technical, economic, and social barriers to adoption, limiting EV penetration in the US, says Pradeep K. Chintagunta, professor of marketing at the Chicago Booth School of Business, who with colleagues researched ways to incentivize EV adoption. Interesting that Elon Musk doesn't think we need to incentivize EVs. So Musk is coming at it from, well, probably the experience of Tesla, which clearly they don't need to. And Pradeep is coming at it from more of a university research or college research type angle. Now, Pradeep from the Chicago School of Business said that barriers include resistance from consumers who are used to the ability to quickly fill up with gas and go, a lack of awareness of the strengths of EVs, and price problems. An electric Ford Focus costs nearly twice the amount of a gas-guzzling one. And that's an issue that I pointed out on this channel many times. In China, why are EVs so popular? It comes down to initial purchase price. Yes, we know running costs are much lower, but initial purchase price also matters. And in China, the initial purchase price of an EV is on par with a gas vehicle. Thus, they're incredibly popular. There's one major protagonist who has influenced that. Donald J. Trump, says independent EV analyst Matthias Schmidt. Trump's administration paused the EV adoption of EVs for 4 years, setting back the development in a country that was already lagging behind. Now President Joe Biden, who said in August 2021 he wanted EVs to make up half of all sales by the end of the decade, is building on the work done by the ZEV Alliance, a lobby group of 10 US states and several countries to promote zero-emission vehicles. I think it is convenient to blame Donald Trump. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a Trump supporter. I don't live in the US. I don't vote in the US. And to be honest, I couldn't care less about Donald Trump. But I think it is convenient and easy and a very simple way to absolve oneself or one's country from responsibility by simply blaming red-haired man. Orange-haired man bad, orange man bad. Therefore, his fault. Therefore, let's not take personal responsibility for where we are at now. Is this what the article is doing? No, but I think that Pradeep from the Chicago School of Business definitely is doing that. It's very easy to put things in a square box. Box here, look, Trump's fault. Nothing else. Just get rid of Trump and now we're back on the right track. Is that actually correct? Maybe, maybe not, but I think it's more complicated than that. Much more complicated. Wired says, the EV industry in the US had to start from scratch, and Bank of America forecasts that EVs will make up just 20% of the car market by 2030, rather than 50%, which is utterly ludicrous. Bank of America should be fired from being a bank for this ridiculous statement, which is nonsensical. Wired says, a large number of these vehicles are expected to be compliance cars, vehicles built by manufacturers solely as a box-ticking exercise to meet the strict. Is that true? Will vehicles be built in the US as simply box-ticking exercises? I think the concept is ridiculous. I think the idea that Wired.com is saying this, making this comment, means that they have an agenda. They believe there's not enough electric vehicle demand in the US to support manufacturers making them other than simply as compliance vehicles. I believe this is utterly bogus nonsense. There are several major policies that drive electrification, says Zifei Yang of the International Council on Clean Transportation, a US non-profit organization. Strengthening fuel efficiency or CO2 emission standards are easy ways to promote EVs and are notably two areas that the Trump administration was lax in enforcing, she says. The Biden White House is trying to catch up for lost time by proposing a raft of new rules aimed at supercharging the EV rollout. The Environmental Protection Agency's revised greenhouse gas emission rules for passenger vehicles finalized in December of 2021 simply returned the standards to what they were under the Obama administration in the mid-2010s. This contrasts sharply with China and Europe, which have aggressively pursued carbon reduction policies that incentivize the production of EVs. You might be startled to hear this, that actually China has enforced regulations. In fact, they have similar regulations to Europe, where if you pollute too much, you have to pay fines. So, yes, some Chinese car companies have been forced to pay Tesla and other EV makers money. Besides the politics, there's a simple reason that US adoption has stalled while EVs in other countries have taken off. Historically, there simply haven't been enough charge points, says Alyssa Altman, head of transportation and mobility at the Cambridge, Massachusetts consulting company Publicis Sapient. Potential EV customers are concerned with keeping their vehicle juiced up for long trips, and for some journeys in the US, the lack of charging stations makes this impossible. Is that true? Is it impossible? No. Alyssa, false news. It is not impossible. Nonsense. I can't believe they say these kinds of things and say it with a straight face. Publicis Sapient figures indicate that remains an issue. With the distribution of the US's 114,000 charging stations unevenly concentrated in areas where Uptake of EVs is already comparatively high, like California. To me, the main bottleneck is infrastructure, says Coco Zhang, an environmental, social and governance analyst at ING. Consumer perception changes slowly due to the current lack of US infrastructure. It's not that American consumers don't want to use EVs. When Volkswagen opened up pre-orders for its ID4 EV in September of 2020, the demand from customers made the website crash. By the way, the same thing has happened for many models. Hyundai, Kia, Lincoln, Cadillac, F-150 Lightning. This is not just the ID4. This is happening for many different models of EV in the US. Websites are crashing because of demand. Worth thinking about. So Wired says it's not that American consumers don't want to use EVs. It's that they're worried about getting stranded in their expensive electric cars. Is that really true? While the figures look bleak at the moment, there is progress and more imaginative solutions are emerging in the US that will work for the American lifestyle, such as providing charging stations at fast food outlets and grocery stores. Says Altman, the ability to grab a Taco Bell while charging your car may be a lure for many Americans. Affordability is also a major issue, says Chintan Gunter, whose research finds that EV sales go up significantly if adopting them becomes less expensive. Obviously, if they're cheaper or on par with gas cars, yes, they're going to be more popular. But are they not popular enough at the moment to justify all these comments from all these so-called academic experts? Well, I'll get to that in just a second. China faces some of the same geographical issues that the US does, including range anxiety, but it has successfully adopted EVs through what Ferdinand Dudenhofer, director of the Center for Automotive Research in Duisburg, Germany, calls a leapfrogging effect. Its automotive industry didn't have much experience in building combustion engines. Therefore, it could easily drop them when an alternative came around. That puts Chinese manufacturers in an oddly enviable position because it is not shackled by a century of business experience to a soon-to-be outmoded model of powering a vehicle. The market can adapt more quickly. This comment I have to pause on because some of these so-called experts that Wired.com has brought in, they need to watch this channel. They just don't, they're not educated on EVs and what's really going on. The truth is that China has been manufacturing their own internal combustion engine vehicles for decades. So the position that they were in 10 years ago was no different to the position that the United States were in. No different at all. The fact that they've chosen through government incentives and entrepreneurial measures to embrace EVs is not an indication of the fact that their current industry was not ICE, because it was. China's producing internal combustion engines the same exact way that America was, maybe slightly more efficiently, slightly more cost competitively, but other than that, identically. So these kinds of bizarre excuses just don't make sense. Getting back to the article, the gulf in approaches to EVs can be seen through a single company that operates in both the US and China, General Motors, through a joint venture with SAIC Motor Corporation and Guangxi Automobile Group. Two Chinese state-owned companies, GM produces the Hongwan Mini EV. I was about to tell you what it was, and then I just realized what the article says. Here's what the article says. It's an ugly entry-level EV that Chinese citizens compare to a bread box on wheels, which retails at around $4,500 US. Okay, this seems like a very negative outlook here on EVs from Wired.com. I don't really understand the negativity. I mean, the fact that they would criticize a $4,500 EV, which is giving mobility to hundreds of thousands of people that previously didn't have it, couldn't afford a car. And people love this car in China. They love it. There's literally millions of customization options on this vehicle. It's like a whole niche, a K-car niche. It's fantastic. Why criticize that? Why disappointing? I am disappointed in you. Sales of that single model in China reached 139,000 in the last 3 months of 2021. The total number of EV models sold by GM in the United States in the same period was 26. Apparently GM have declined to comment on this story. Fair enough, GM. But it's not just China. For years, the European Union has pursued a low-carbon green agenda, which dovetails well with the rise of EVs. More than 2.3 million EVs were sold in Europe in 2021, according to estimates by research firm Bloomberg NEF. That's one EV for every 325 people on the continent. The reason is centralized directives from the European Union to move to a low-carbon economy and seek out alternative less polluting forms of transport. When a supranational political organization sets a carbon zero greenhouse gas emissions target by 2050, a legal requirement to reduce greenhouse gases by 55% compared to 1990 volumes, by the same time, the adoption of EVs becomes a useful and necessary tool in the arsenal. The truth is that in Europe, companies get fined so much that they have to produce EVs. They have no choice. Or they pay Tesla a lot of money. Or they pay fines to the EU, which are even more money than they have to pay Tesla. Yet one US company is defying the broader trend and could help turn the tide of EVs in the US. EV manufacturer Tesla shipped nearly 1 million cars in 2021, but only a third of them were estimated to have been sold in the US, despite the fact that the company has its manufacturing base in Fremont, California, ironically on the site of GM's old headquarters, between 1962 and 1982, which they got for a bargain, by the way, because it wasn't a factory that was of any use to Toyota or General Motors, so Tesla picked it up for nothing. Well, not nothing, but very cheap. Tesla has a gigafactory in Shanghai, China, and is poised to open one in Berlin, Germany, the latter of which the company's CEO Elon Musk will visit in mid-February. Now, speaking of Tesla's gigafactory in China, that factory have just announced, well, we've just heard leaks that they are going to almost double the size of that factory to be able to produce 2 million EVs per year from that one factory. I made a video about that. I'll put a link in the description below to that video. That is insane. That would make it by far the most productive car factory in the world, period. Tesla could lead the trend for EVs, says Zhang. Of course, they do lead it. That's just silly. Now Tesla has struck a deal with car rental companies to rent out some of their fleet. It could give customers an opportunity to try them without purchasing them. Very true. Hertz, big player in the rental fleet in America. And of course, if you go and test drive one, how do you do it? Just go to Hertz and hire a car. But many people will be test driving one without even realizing it. Simply by going and hiring a rental car, they'll be able to drive an electric one. And they're going to find out just how much better electric cars are. At present, the future EVs in the country, in the US, appears to be dependent on one company. Tesla accounts for the lion's share of EV sales in the US, whereas elsewhere competition is more diverse, even if Musk's company still holds the top spot. And while one company dominates, the uptake of EVs is likely to be slow, fears Chinta Gunter, considering that it has been more than 10 years since the first mass-produced EV, and the green vehicle market share is still around 5%, it may not be very quick. Well, I don't share your pessimism, Wired.com. In fact, I think your articles are littered with incorrect facts, very emotional conjecture, very negative sentiment, very few facts. Kind of facts that were turned around and twisted to use them to look at things in a negative way. Here's a very good fact that you didn't consider. How many cars are sold in the US every year? All right? In America, car sales hit 15 million in 2021. Right now, there are pre-orders for cars in the US, right? Internal combustion engine vehicles have around about 100,000 pre-orders. Electric, 2 million. 2 million. More, in fact, more than 2 million. Tesla have 1.3 million just for the Cybertruck alone. What about all the pre-orders they have for the Model 3, for the Model Y? What about all the pre-orders that Ford have for the F-150 Lightning? More than 200,000. Could be 250,000 by now. What about all the pre-orders that Rivian have for their very expensive but very impressive electric truck? More than 70,000. You count all those up, and we're looking at more than 2 million pre-orders. There's only just over 100,000 pre-orders for internal combustion engines. What do people want? That proves right there that all of this article is totally bogus. Americans, not all of them, but a very large percentage of them want electric vehicles. Clearly, we can see that. These demand numbers prove that beyond any question whatsoever. And maybe you could say, yeah, but Viking, yeah, but hang on, but Sam, but it's just because EVs are new. No, they're not. Sorry, you can't tell me that argument. EVs have been around in the US for years. Literally years. Tesla was selling the Model 3 now 4 years ago. 4 years. And still, now that is an old car. The Model 3 is an old car. And yet still, there is such demand You cannot buy. In fact, that they're more expensive to buy secondhand in many states across the US because demand is so high. So no, sure, there's some people in America who think that there's not enough chargers, but there's also a lot of people who are aware that there are enough. And in fact, that those number of chargers are increasing every single day by the hundreds. This article here, all this does is set us back with false information, with negativity, with cynicism, with people who see the world. They look through the window and they don't see the sunset. All they see is the specks on the window. That, my friends, is what we call a pessimist. And I'd like to ask you right now, how many pessimists have you ever met that have created things that are amazing, that have created new companies and new businesses, that have led revolutions, that have done great things for people? I haven't heard of one. What we need is optimism and positivity. And I can tell you now that there are millions of Americans that want EVs, and very soon they're going to get them. And even more so, that's going to lead to companies like GM and Ford, maybe even Toyota, I don't know, changing their mind. Look at what Ford and GM have done over the last 12 months. They change their mind constantly. They're like schizophrenics. They change their mind constantly because they start to realize what is going on. We have all these hundreds of thousands of pre-orders for EVs. We better change. We better change. They are changing. The market in the US will change to the point of being beyond recognition within the space of 5 years. Once customers start to say, we only want EVs, which is going to happen, think about this, right? You drive your electric truck onto the work site. Your friends are curious. They drive it. They realize how much better it is. Do you really think that all of them are just going to go, no, I'm just happy to drive my old gas vehicle? They might be, but when they buy a new vehicle, they're going to want the best. And then that is when the tide will turn. And manufacturers that are not making EVs will be in enormous trouble. And that's why I'm predicting Toyota will be in enormous trouble, because they won't be ready. Companies like GM and Ford, while they're still they're behind right now, behind Tesla, and their production numbers are at the moment very poor. But within the next few years, that will drastically change. I can guarantee it. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. And let me know in the comment section below what you think about what's going to happen in the US car market over the next decade.